was astonishing. We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object. It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine. Completely.
What if the world's first computer was built over 2,000 years ago and then lost to the sea? In 1900, sponge divers off a tiny Greek island discovered a corroded lump of bronze, the Antikythera Computer.
Sponge divers discovered a shipwreck off the tiny island of Antikythera in Greece.
For over a century, historians struggled to understand it. It wasn't just a machine, it tracked the heavens, predicted eclipses, and modeled the cosmos with precision no one thought possible. Here's the question: how could a device this sophisticated exist in an era we thought was technologically primitive? Now AI has finally rebuilt its missing half. What it calculates will shock historians and could rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient science. Celestial machine. The recovery of the Antikythera wreck between 1900 and 1901 was one of the first major underwater archaeological operations in history. And by modern standards, it was extraordinarily dangerous. The sponge divers were working at depths that pushed the physiological limits of breath hold and hard hat diving technology of the period. Several of them suffered serious decompression injuries during the operation. One died. They were working essentially blind in cold, dark water at 150 feet, feeling their way around a debris field that extended across a significant area of rocky seabed. What they brought up was extraordinary by any measure. The bronze Antikythera youth, a life-size figure of a young man that most scholars now date to the 4th century BC, is considered one of the finest surviving examples of ancient Greek bronze sculpture.
Now an exhibition bringing together ancient sculptures once thought lost forever.
The Philosopher, another bronze portrait head recovered from the wreck, carries a psychological intensity and technical mastery that still stops museum visitors in their tracks today. Marble statues, bronze vessels, glass bowls, ceramic amphorae, and a remarkable collection of personal objects, including bronze bed fittings and glassware that suggest the cargo was assembled for someone of considerable wealth and taste. The ship itself is now estimated to have been roughly 50 meters long, making it one of the larger vessels of its period, and the cargo assemblage points toward a date sometime around 65 to 60 BC for the sinking. The most widely accepted theory is that the ship was carrying looted or purchased Greek art from somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, most likely bound for Rome, where wealthy Roman patrons were paying enormous sums for Greek masterworks during the late Republic period. And the lump that contained the mechanism was not recognized as significant during the initial recovery. It was logged as corroded bronze material, which was accurate as far as it went, and transferred to the Athens Museum along with everything else. The gear tooth that Stays spotted in 1902 was the first indication that the lump was something other than debris. But even after Stays identified the gears, the full significance of what the object represented took decades to appreciate. Early researchers proposed that it might be some kind of astrolabe, a navigational or astronomical instrument. The technology for that was at least plausible within conventional understanding of ancient science. The word computer was not in anyone's vocabulary for describing ancient artifacts in 1902.
1902, an ancient analog computer known as the Antikythera mechanism was first identified by Greek archaeologists
for the obvious reason that computers did not exist yet. It was not until the British science historian Derek de Solla Price published a landmark analysis in 1959 and a more detailed study in 1974 that the mechanism began to be understood in anything approaching its true complexity. Price was the first researcher to systematically document the gear train and propose a functional reconstruction. His 1974 paper, titled Gears from the Greeks, published in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society, argued that the device was an analog computer for astronomical calculation. and that its mechanical sophistication was without parallel in the ancient world. The scientific community received this with something between fascination and skepticism. And because what Price was describing required accepting that ancient Greek craftsmen had achieved a level of mechanical engineering that history had simply not credited them with. And for some researchers, that was a more difficult proposition than Price's evidence could fully overcome. Then the CT scanners arrived, and the argument about what the Antikythera mechanism was became considerably harder to have. Kronos device. The 82 surviving fragments of the Antikythera mechanism are housed in the Athens National Archaeological Museum, and they represent somewhere between a third and a half of the original device, depending on which reconstruction model you find most persuasive. The largest fragment, designated Fragment A, contains the majority of the surviving gears and gives the clearest picture of the mechanism's internal structure. 30 gears survive in recognizable form. The original device almost certainly contained more, with most estimates placing the total somewhere between 30 and 40 gears, though some reconstruction models propose higher numbers. The dating of the mechanism is established by multiple independent lines of evidence. The coins recovered from the wreck date the sinking to around 65 to 60 BC. The astronomical parameters encoded in the mechanism's cycles can be calculated backward from known astronomical tables to identify the epoch they were calibrated for, which points toward approximately 100 to 87 BC. Stylistic analysis of the inscriptions places them within the same general period. The convergence of these independent methods gives researchers reasonable confidence in a 1st century BC date for the device's construction. What does it actually calculate? This is where the surviving inscriptions become critical, because the mechanism does not just contain gears. It contains text. Thousands of characters of ancient Greek inscribed on the bronze surfaces of the fragments, forming what amounts to an instruction manual and a description of the device's functions. The text was largely illegible until modern imaging technology was applied to the fragments, and the recovery of that text over the past 2 decades has been transformative for understanding what the mechanism was built to do. The back of the device contains 2 large spiral dials, one on the upper half and one on the lower. And the upper back dial tracks the Metonic cycle, a period of 19 years after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same calendar dates. The ancient Greeks understood this cycle with impressive precision, and the Metonic dial on the mechanism tracks it with a gear ratio that produces the correct result to a level of accuracy that is genuinely remarkable for hand-cut bronze gears. Inside the Metonic dial sits a smaller dial tracking the Callippic cycle, 76 years, 4 Metonic cycles, representing a further refinement of the lunar calendar calculation. The lower back dial tracks the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years and 11 days, after which solar and lunar eclipses repeat in a predictable sequence. The Saros cycle was the cornerstone of ancient eclipse prediction, and the mechanism's lower dial encodes it with a subsidiary dial for the Exeligmos cycle, 54 years, 3 Saros cycles, which accounts for the fractional day in the Saros period that would otherwise cause the eclipse predictions to drift out of alignment over time. There is also a dial tracking the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, the Olympiad, with subdivisions for the Isthmian, Pythian, Nemean, and Olympic Games separately. This is not astronomy. This is a civic calendar function embedded directly into a device that also predicts eclipses and models planetary motion. The combination tells you something important about who this device was made for. It was made for someone whose world encompassed both the cosmic and the civic, for whom the movements of the heavens and the schedule of the athletic festivals were equally important reference points for navigating life. The gears themselves are extraordinary. The teeth are cut by hand, using files and gravers, to a precision that modern measurement has confirmed is remarkably consistent given the tools available. The gear ratios encode mathematical relationships that require knowledge of specific astronomical periods, knowledge that the ancient Greeks demonstrably had from their own astronomical tradition, but that also required someone to translate that knowledge into the correct tooth counts and gear arrangements to achieve the desired mechanical output. That translation requires both astronomical knowledge and mechanical engineering skill simultaneously. It is not a combination that appears by accident. This device was built by someone or some group of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had the workshop capability to execute it. Retrograde gears. For decades after Derek de Solla Price's foundational analysis, the front of the Antikythera mechanism remained the great unsolved problem.
What the Antikythera mechanism tells us is that history is different.
The back dials, complex as they are, left enough surviving fragments and inscriptions that their functions could be reconstructed with reasonable confidence. The front was different. The front was mostly gone. And what the front was supposed to show, a moving model of the cosmos itself, was the most ambitious part of the entire device. What we know about the front comes from three sources. The surviving fragments give us partial gear trains that must connect to something on the front face. The inscriptions on the back of the device reference what the front display showed, including descriptions of planetary motions, and the physical constraints of the surviving mechanism, the space available, the gear ratios already established, the mounting points visible in the fragments, place hard limits on what reconstruction models are mechanically possible. The breakthrough in reading the inscriptions came in 2005 when a research collaboration called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project applied a combination of high-resolution surface imaging and X-ray computed tomography to all 82 fragments. The CT scanning in particular was transformative. It allowed researchers to see not just the surface of the fragments, but the internal layers of corroded bronze, revealing gear structures buried inside the corrosion and critically, revealing text that was hidden beneath surfaces that had fused together over 2 millennia of saltwater immersion. The recovered inscriptions included what researchers identified as a manual for the device, describing its functions in terms that a literate user could follow. Some of that text describes the front display in enough detail to establish that it showed the positions of the Sun, Moon, and the 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, against the background of the zodiac. In 2021, a research team from University College London, led by Professor Tony Freeth, published a proposed reconstruction of the front of the mechanism that represented the most detailed and mechanically rigorous model attempted to that point. Freeth's team used the surviving fragments, the recovered inscription text, and the known astronomical parameters to construct a computer model of what the front display would have required in terms of gearing. The result was a system of extraordinary complexity. To display the motions of the planets accurately, the mechanism needed to account for the fact that planets do not move at constant speeds across the sky from Earth's perspective. They speed up, slow down, and at certain points appear to move backward, a phenomenon called retrograde motion that results from the geometry of orbits viewed from a moving Earth. The ancient Greeks explained this using epicycles, the idea that planets move in small circles whose centers themselves move around larger circles. Modeling that mechanically requires a specific type of gear arrangement called epicyclic gearing, as where a gear rotates on a carrier that itself rotates around a central axis. The UCL reconstruction proposed that the mechanism used a pin and slot device within the epicyclic gear train to produce the varying speeds needed to model the moon's motion accurately, and that similar principles were applied to the planetary displays. This is genuinely sophisticated mechanical thinking. The pin and slot mechanism is elegant precisely because it achieves a complex mathematical output, varying rotational speed, through a simple and compact physical arrangement. You do not stumble onto that solution. You reason your way to it. When the UCL team built a physical model of their proposed reconstruction, it worked. The gears meshed. The displays moved. The astronomical outputs were within the expected range of accuracy. A 2,000-year-old machine, reconstructed from surviving fragments and recovered text, functioned as its designers intended. That is not a legend. That is not speculation. That is engineering verification. Lost workshop. One of the questions that sits underneath all the astronomical analysis is the one that is hardest to answer with any of the tools that astronomers and classicists bring to the problem. How was this thing actually made? Not what does it calculate, not what do the inscriptions say, but who stood at a workbench in the 1st century BC, picked up a graver and a file, and cut these gear teeth to this precision? What workshop produced this? What tradition of craft knowledge made it possible? The mechanical analysis of the surviving gears has been detailed enough to answer some of these questions in measurable terms. Researchers have examined the tooth profiles, the spacing consistency, the surface finish of the bronze, and the geometric precision of the gear blanks using modern metrology. What they found is that the gears are not perfect by modern manufacturing standards. They show the natural variation of hand-cut work. Tooth spacing is consistent but not identical from tooth to tooth. The gear blanks are circular but not with the perfection that a modern machine tool would produce. And yet they work. The gear train functions despite these variations because the designer built in sufficient tolerance for the natural imprecision of hand manufacture. That is itself a sophisticated design decision. Building a mechanism that is robust to the limitations of the manufacturing process requires understanding those limitations in advance and designing around them. Whoever built the Antikythera mechanism understood not just what they wanted the device to do, but what their tools and materials could realistically achieve, and they designed to that reality. Computer simulations testing the gear train under operating conditions have confirmed that the mechanism would have functioned reliably under normal use, with friction and wear rates consistent with a device that could be used daily over a period of years without mechanical failure. This is not a one-time demonstration piece. This was built to be used. The bigger question is whether it was unique. The honest answer is that we do not know, and the honest framing of that uncertainty matters. Yet the Antikythera mechanism is the only device of its kind that has survived. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, particularly for objects made of bronze, a material that was extremely valuable in the ancient world and was routinely melted down and reused when objects became damaged, unfashionable, or simply inconvenient to store. There are textual references in ancient Greek and Roman sources to complex mechanical devices, to automata and mechanical theaters and devices that tracked celestial motions. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC,
its greatest champion was Marcus Tullius Cicero, a lawyer and politician in ancient Rome,
described a device made by the Greek mathematician Archimedes that modeled the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Archimedes died in 212 BC, roughly a century before the Antikythera mechanism was made. If Cicero's description is accurate, the Antikythera device was not the first of its kind. It may have been one of a tradition of such devices, most of which did not survive because bronze does not survive unless it ends up on the bottom of the sea in a sealed wreck. The Antikythera mechanism may be the sole survivor of a technological tradition that was more widespread than we know, or it may have been a singular masterwork by a genius working beyond the boundaries of what their contemporaries could achieve. The evidence does not currently allow us to choose confidently between these possibilities, and that ambiguity is itself one of the most important things the mechanism tells us about the ancient world. Ancient Greek. To fully appreciate what the Antikythera mechanism was, you need to inhabit the cosmological worldview of the person who would have used it. Because this was not a scientific instrument in the modern sense, designed to generate data for analysis by a researcher working within a framework of falsifiable hypotheses. It was a model of the universe as the ancient Greeks understood and experienced it, built to make that universe legible and navigable for the educated person standing in front of it. In the Greek cosmological model, the Earth sat at the center of everything. Around it moved the moon, then Mercury, then Venus, then the Sun, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. Each body carried on its own sphere in a nested arrangement that placed the fixed stars on the outermost sphere of all. This geocentric model was not a naive misunderstanding. It was the result of careful observation and sophisticated mathematical modeling by some of the sharpest minds in the ancient world. And it described the apparent behavior of the celestial bodies with a precision that was genuinely useful for navigation, agriculture, religion, and civic life over many centuries. The front face of the mechanism displayed this cosmos in motion. At the center, the Earth, implied rather than shown, the reference point around which everything else moved. Around it, the concentric rings for each of the known bodies, each one moving at the rate encoded in its gear train, each one positioned according to the astronomical parameters built into the mechanism at its construction. The moon display was particularly sophisticated. It included a small sphere, half white and half black, that rotated as the mechanism turned, showing the current phase of the moon as seen from Earth. That is not just astronomically accurate, that is beautiful. Someone designed a physical representation of moonlight and darkness that rotated inside a bronze machine to show you, at a glance, whether the moon tonight would be a crescent or a full face, or something in between. There was also a pointer called the dragon hand, which tracked the nodes of the moon's orbit, the 2 points where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic. When the moon is near these nodes during a new or full moon, eclipses become possible. The dragon hand was the mechanism's way of marking eclipse seasons, the periods when the sky was watching and the cosmos was capable of its most dramatic demonstrations. The outer ring of the front display showed the zodiac.
Zodiac power products in India sold more than 10 million units. Now it's creating a lot of buzz in the USA and the UK.
The 12 constellations along the ecliptic through which the sun moves over the course of a year. Inside this was a ring showing the Egyptian calendar of 365 days, which could be adjusted for the quarter-day discrepancy that accumulates over 4 years, the same discrepancy that our leap year system accounts for. The mechanism's designer knew about this drift and built in a correction mechanism. On or near the front face, the device also referenced a parapegma, a star calendar that tracked the rising and setting of specific stars and star clusters throughout the year. The parapegma was a practical agricultural and navigational tool, telling you when Arcturus rose and what that meant for the sailing season, when the Pleiades set, and what that meant for the farmer preparing his fields. Imagine someone, a scholar, an astronomer, a wealthy patron, turning the small crank on the side of the mechanism, watching the sun pointer move along the zodiac ring, and the moon phase sphere rotating to show the current face of the moon, the planetary pointers advancing at their different rates, the Saros dial counting toward the next eclipse, the Olympiad dial marking the approaching festival season. The entire known cosmos moving in your hands at the turning of a crank. That is what the Antikythera mechanism was. Not just a calculator, not just an instrument, a model of the universe, small enough to carry, precise enough to trust, and beautiful enough to make the person holding it feel, even for a moment, like they understood the sky. The Antikythera mechanism lay hidden for 2,000 years, a whisper of a civilization capable of unimaginable precision. Its secrets survived the sea, even as the knowledge that created it almost vanished entirely. And yet, what we have recovered is only a fragment, a single window into a world we thought we understood. What other devices, what other achievements of ancient engineering were lost to time, forgotten, or melted down before anyone could recognize their brilliance? How many extraordinary inventions have slipped through history's fingers, leaving only whispers and legends behind? The story of the Antikythera mechanism reminds us that history is never as linear as we believe, and that genius can appear, vanish, and reappear in the most unexpected ways. The question now is not just what we have found, But what else is still waiting, unseen, beneath the waves, ready to rewrite everything we think we know about the past?